Hello, my name is Bret Wills, and welcome to the Disability Den, a TDC podcast. Today I am pleased to be joined by Rob Snoek. Rob represented Canada 3 times at the Paralympic Summer Games in para-athletics. He has held multiple records in the 100-meter, 200-meter, and long jump. He has 2 World Championship medals and 4 Canadian records. Along with his extensive Paralympic coverage, he's done work with the CBC, and he's also done play-by-play for the Oshawa Generals and the Peterborough Petes. Rob, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
First of all, I'd like to touch on something that I'm passionate about that I found interesting in your life, and that is how you became involved in doing play-by-play for the Oshawa Generals and the Peterborough Petes.
Wow. How long do we have?
You have as long as you need.
When I was growing up, I always wanted to play in the NHL, and I guess realized at some point, maybe in high school, that a kid with an artificial leg probably wasn't going to play in the NHL. So then I started to dream about sport, covering sport as a broadcaster. And so I went to school for TV and radio at Seneca College in Toronto, and then as that was happening, I also kind of learned about the whole realm of Paralympic sport. And long story short, I chased that dream for over a decade, and as you mentioned, competed at the Paralympics 3 times. But during that time, I was always very interested in the media side of things. So that someone would do an interview with me, and I'd be asking them as many questions as they are asking me. And so I kind of always knew that at the end of my career as a track and field athlete, I was going to want to pursue that. And that's more or less what happened. When I stopped running, I started applying for jobs at different radio stations, and the only thing I was able to get was like a part-time job at a station in Oshawa, doing a little bit of news here and there. But I got to know some people around there, and kind of shared with somebody that it was my dream to, one of my dreams to be the play-by-play announcer of the Generals. And within weeks of that happening, this person was sitting in the office of the boss, and someone else had just left the office and basically resigned from the position of play-by-play with the Generals. And he's like, I don't know who I'm going to get. And she says, I know exactly who you're going to get, or who you could ask. And she goes, he works here already. And so she told him that I was interested in that. He didn't even know that. And from then I started doing the Generals. And then I had been getting small assignments with CBC research, various things. And that my first play-by-play, my first on-air assignment with CBC television was the Salt Lake City Paralympics. And then my first play-by-play was the next year, the Pan American Games. And so the two things kind of went hand in hand, covering OHL hockey and working at the CBC and learning from one and using it in the other, and that kind of thing. And it helped strengthen my career. So I did the Generals for 7 years, and then they stopped stopped broadcasting on the radio station. And then a year went by, and I was really sad and tried hard to find opportunities to do play-by-play. And my friend Mike Oak, who was the general manager and still is, he was the assistant GM of the Petes, Peterborough Petes, called me and said that he thinks there's an opening in Peterborough. And again, long story short, eventually I was hired to do play-by-play of the Petes and did that for 8 years. So you pile it all up, that's 15 years. It's probably 1,000 games of play-by-play and probably 100,000 miles of traveling on an OHL bus. But a really, really great experience. And somehow that's led to, I don't even know how many Olympics and Paralympics, but lots. And I've been really, really blessed to be able to do that and cover a lot of different sports. And to me, the best thing about broadcasting is it's the closest thing you can get to being in the sport without being an athlete anymore. And so it's I always talk about it as being in the fray, as close to the fray as you can.
We touched briefly already about your Canadian para athletics career. Do you think your career with the Canadian para athletics team helped you become successful in your media career?
For sure. I mean, I think when you're an athlete, you learn about not just terms like personal best, but philosophies like personal best, so that you really understand that if you want to be better next year, you have to start building on that today. So I always try to be better today than I was yesterday, and always try to put elements in place that I'll be even better tomorrow. So I think when you have that sort of passion for personal excellence that you just keep building on, then that is transferable into other areas of life. And so for me, that was transferable from running around a track and jumping in the sand, as my son used to say when he was a little kid. My daddy runs fast and he jumps in the sand, and that was kind of my job for a while. And that to becoming a person who describes those actions of athletes. And yeah, I think it went hand in hand with that.
As someone who's competed at a Paralympics and is fortunate enough to be able to cover a Paralympics and Olympics, what is your favorite moment, either competing or covering, or can you share with us one of each?
Yeah, that would be better. That's like picking a favorite child. So, but let me think. In terms of, I don't know. It's so hard. I don't think about favorite moments, but I will never forget the moment of walking into the stadium in Barcelona in 1992 at the Paralympics. Here's this kid with an artificial leg from Orono, Ontario, who is representing Canada at an international event. So that was really, really huge. And then to do that 3 times at Paralympics and do it at many other events, and to have a strong career and be sponsored by companies and who wanted to affiliate with you, those are all really, really significant. In terms of like an actual highlight moment of my career, winning a silver medal at the World Championships in 1998 in England, was the pinnacle and the fastest time I ran. And, that's something I'll always have and always remember. So now let me think. As a broadcaster, I was given the opportunity and a huge privilege to do play-by-play of athletics for Paralympics in Athens in 2004 and in Beijing in 2008. And those happened to be the events that were owned by Canadian Chantal Petitclerc, and winning gold and 5-time gold medalist at both of those games. And for me to have the privilege to call that was absolutely huge in my career. So for Paralympics, that would have to be at the very top of the list. Called play-by-play of Team Canada wheelchair basketball at the World Championships, which were held in Toronto at the old Maple Leaf Gardens, and Canada won the gold medal a few years back, and that was absolutely huge. The Olympics, calling the snowboard slopestyle event in Sochi, probably in 2014, where Canadian Mark McMorris was a bronze medalist, and I was working in the booth with his brother Craig, who's our color commentator at CBC. So that's just a pretty special moment, for me, but also to be there when it's such a special moment for a family member who was being very professional at the time when his brother was reaching that amazing pinnacle. So that was pretty special too. And I could sit here for half an hour and I probably think of 20 different moments, but those are definitely a few of them.
I was just sitting here listening to you, and you were talking about two brothers and the family bond and just the euphoria that he may have felt or must have felt while he watched his
Mm-hmm.
brother win a medal. And it had me thinking, did you have any role models growing up, whether it be a professional athlete or somebody that was actually in the booth, when you kind of realized that being an NHL player wasn't in the cards?
Well, I'm not so sure I did. It I guess in a way they seem so far away. I mean, I had role models growing up to a certain extent. My brother Jim is 3.5 years older than me, and he was my big brother, and I tried to emulate him in a lot of ways. And he was actually a really great athlete as well. So that was one mentor. And then when I got my first taste in broadcasting, I worked at Chum Radio in Toronto, and there were several really iconic names who were working there at the time. Jeff Howitt was the newscaster at Chum FM and was for decades, and just very, very talented and succinct and a great storyteller. And we became friends. So I was one of the people. And at the same time, there was a sportscaster there named Rick Hodge, who's a national award winner and super talented. And I would say if you listen to me do a sports broadcast on the radio these days, you can hear little bits of both of them in that. And not that I mean to be copying them, but I think we all just kind of take from them as we grow. And so those guys I really looked up to and were just super talented. And I love the way they told stories. And I've tried to tell stories about sport in a way that are really interesting to people. And that's whether it's Paralympic sport or Olympic sport or professional sport. I don't think the scores are that important. The stories behind the scores are what's really important. So that's what I've always tried to concentrate on.
As I sit here listening to you, I'm overwhelmed at how humble you appear to be when you speak about your experiences and what you've gone through. And I can understand and appreciate if you don't feel the same way, but I'm wondering how you have become so humble after everything you've accomplished.
I don't know. I don't think of it that way at all. I mean, listen, I've spent some time in my life with. Just last week, I had the huge privilege of working with Becky Scott, who is an absolute legend in Canadian sport, gold medalist in cross country skiing. She's the one who had the medals basically robbed from her by cheating athletes from other countries. And it took several years for her to get them back. And she's just continued to be a diplomatic leader. And so you spend time with people like that, with Chantal Petitclerc, with the great Patrick Anderson in wheelchair basketball. I spent time with NHL players and coaches, and almost to a person, they're not impressed with themselves. And you're just really happy with your accomplishments to a certain extent, but it's your experiences, I think, that really matter. And it's funny, I was talking about that with someone very recently and said, when I was a Paralympic athlete, my kids were little. They didn't care that I was a Paralympic athlete. I mean, barely. Like, they hardly knew. If I was a bad dad or a good dad, that's what mattered to them, right? So whether you're an Olympic gold medalist like Becky Scott, or a many, many time Paralympic gold medalist like Chantal Petitclerc, or maybe the greatest wheelchair basketball player ever like Patrick Anderson, or a guy like Rob Snook, you still have to live your everyday life and shovel your driveway when you have a big snowstorm, and you have to feed your dog and do all of those things. So the humility is not false. It's real. It's just about living, and it's about being.
You've worked with some amazing athletes in your para athletic career, as well as you're working with some amazing individuals when it comes to your broadcasting career. Do you have any favorites, or is there anybody that kind of left you in awe when you didn't realize they would?
Wow. Well, to be very fair, to CBC does an incredible job of finding, testing, choosing, and mentoring their color commentators. And they're not always the most famous person in a specific sport, but they're usually the ones who are best at articulating it. So, uh, I just love the opportunities that I've had. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Craig McMorris, because I started working with Craig when he was 22 years old, covering a sport that I'd never covered before in snowboarding. And he knew everything about it. He was 22 years old, and he was excellent right from the get-go. But he was a sponge, and he wanted information from me to learn the best he could. And he's just a really great personality. And he's from Regina, Saskatchewan, and folks from Regina have a pretty, humble way about them as well. Even though he's accomplished these great things, and he's a commentator on X Games and many times with the Olympics with CBC, and so Craig and I have a real special on-air relationship, I think, because he obviously knows the sport inside out and backwards, knows everything that's happening, has great energy and passion in articulating it, and is understanding. But he also realizes that lots of people in Canada who watch it don't know that, don't have that expertise. And so I represent that side. So I'm always asking him questions and getting him to, really detail the elements that he's talking about. Wait, you just talked about some crazy move, triple cork 1440 with a chicken salad grab or something. That's one of the things in snowboarding. What is that? Tell us what's a bloody Dracula or whatever, right? And so we've got really, really great feedback over the years, and I wish I could work with them more and more, because it's always such a pleasure. So that's been really fun. I've worked with Paul Rosen in sledge hockey, and Paul's super talented, really good at articulating the game. He's been a lot of fun in the last few Paralympics. Even worked with Rick Middleton, former NHL player, on sledge hockey. People don't know this, but he used to coach the U.S. sledge hockey team, coached them to a gold medal, in fact, in Salt Lake City. And one other person I want to mention is Mark Hees. Mark I work with on beach volleyball for CBC. And again, he's got great energy, great passion for his sport. And there's never one thing that happens on the court that he didn't understand. And that is so important to have that when you're a play-by-play announcer like me, who maybe bounces around to a few different sports. You can do as much homework as you can, but there's going to be something, and it's going to be 10 things in the tournament that you didn't understand. And so to have that person who does, and be able to articulate it in a way that's digestible for Canadians is really, really vital. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a few really important names.
Hey, Rob, I want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Disability Den. I am your host, Bret Wills. This podcast has been brought to you by the Disability Channel and is made possible by the Introduction to Accessible Content Production program in partnership with Mohawk College and Alware Limited.